All right, welcome. Today, we're cracking open a really fascinating ancient document. Think of it as part legal code, part instruction manual for rituals, and honestly, part social contract. We're going to dive deep into Leviticus chapter 7 to get a handle on these super detailed rules that shaped, well, pretty much everything for ancient Israelite society.
And this is what we're talking about, the source material itself. It looks dense, right? Incredibly specific. But for the people who lived by it, this was so much more than just words on a page. This was their blueprint for how to interact with the divine, with each other, and with the entire world around them.
So that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? We're not just looking at what the rules were. We're really trying to understand why they were so incredibly detailed. What kind of values, what fears, what social structures are hiding between the lines of these ancient instructions?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at offerings for atonement, how to make things right. Then we'll shift gears to offerings of communion and celebration. After that, we'll get into the very strict dietary laws, see how the priests were actually supported, and finally we'll look at how the text itself wraps everything up.
So first up, the trespass offering. Now, this wasn't just some general, oops, I'm sorry kind of sacrifice. No, this was for specific, identifiable wrongdoings. It was a formal process for fixing a broken relationship, whether that was with God or with one of your neighbors.
The text actually calls this offering most holy, and that right there tells you just how seriously they took these violations. Atonement wasn't a casual thing. It was this deeply sacred procedure, all designed to restore order and purity to the entire community.
And the procedure was incredibly precise. The exact location of the slaughter, the specific way the blood was handled, the particular organs that had to be burned, every single detail was prescribed. This was not the time to get creative. Every little step carried immense significance, and there was absolutely no room for improvisation. So what happened to the rest of the animal? Well, this verse clears it right up. The priest who performs the ritual gets to keep it. This little detail shows us that the whole system isn't just a religious act, it's also a very practical way of making sure the priesthood is provided for. Now let's switch gears and look at a totally different kind of offering. See, not all sacrifices were about fixing a mistake. The peace offering was all about fellowship, about thanksgiving, and about vows. These were rituals designed to actually strengthen community bonds. You could bring this offering for a few different reasons. Maybe you wanted to give thanks for something good that happened, or you needed to fulfill a vow you'd made, or maybe it was just a voluntary act of worship. And unlike that trespass offering, this one was usually shared and eaten by the worshiper and their family. It basically turned into a sacred communal meal. But here's where it gets interesting. There were strict deadlines. A Thanksgiving offering, it had to be eaten the very same day, no leftovers. For vow and voluntary offerings, you got a little more time. You could heat it that day or the next. But these weren't just suggestions. They were absolute rules about handling sacred food.
So that raises a pretty obvious question, right? What happens if you've got leftovers on day 3? What are you supposed to do?
And the answer is final. You have to destroy it with fire. The text is totally clear that if it's eaten on the 3rd day, it becomes an abomination, and the whole sacrifice is basically null and void. It just goes to show how deeply the concepts of time and holiness were connected. Now, this whole concern with what you can and can't eat goes way beyond just the sacrificial meat. The chapter also lays out some universal dietary laws that applied to the entire community all the time.
2 big prohibitions were considered permanent. First, the fat of sacrificial animals. That was always considered the Lord's portion, so it was forbidden to eat. And second, and this is much broader, consuming the blood of any animal was completely off limits, which was all rooted in the idea that the life of a creature is literally in its blood.
And the penalty for breaking these rules? It was severe. Being cut off from his people, that was more than just a punishment. In a tribal society, this meant excommunication. It was a kind of social death. You'd lose your place in the community, your identity, and all of your protection.
So you have all these complex rituals and really specific rules, and they were all administered by the priests. This last section of the chapter explains exactly how the system was designed to support them, not just for a little while, but as a permanent institution. The text uses these very specific technical terms, the wave breast and the heave shoulder. These were not just random cuts of meat. Nope, they were designated portions of the peace offerings, and they were ritually presented before being given to the priests. So the breast was symbolically waved as an offering. and the right shoulder was heaved or lifted up. After this little ritual was done, these prime cuts of meat became the property of the priestly line of Aaron and his sons. It was a way to make sure they always had a consistent source of food.
And just to be clear, this was not a temporary deal. The text makes it crystal clear that this provision for the priest was a statute forever. It was a permanent, divinely commanded part of the whole social and religious structure.
And then the chapter wraps up with its own summary, tying all these different laws together into one cohesive statement delivered by Moses. This verse kind of acts like the closing statement in a legal document, you know? It lists out every single category of offering, trespass, peace, and others we haven't even talked about here, and presents them as one complete and authoritative system. This is the law, handed down in the wilderness of Sinai. End of story.
Which leaves us with one final thought. A system this detailed suggests a really deep belief that order and community health really depends on getting the details right. It seems to imply that value wasn't just placed on belief, but on disciplined physical action. So what did they value most? Control? Community? Reverence? You know, that's something to think about.